welcome to the Outsider Edge. We're diving into some really fascinating stuff from Dr. Ravier over these next 13 episodes.
Oh, yeah.
All from his book, General Theory of Coaching.
Absolutely.
And we're going to be looking at it through a really interesting lens, I think, starting with Socrates.
Yeah, that's right.
Is he really this coaching model that everybody thinks he is? That's kind of what we're going to get into today.
You know what's really fascinating is that Dr. Ravier actually challenges that traditional view of Socrates.
Okay.
He doesn't just take it at face value.
Right.
You know, he actually goes back to the source.
Okay.
And he dives deep into Plato's writings.
Yeah.
And uncovers these surprising contradictions in how Socrates is portrayed.
Okay, let's unpack this then.
Yeah.
We all know Socrates for his method of questioning, but was he really a coach in the modern sense?
Well, that's exactly what Dr. Ravier is getting at.
Okay.
He points out that Socrates, according to Plato, actually compared his philosophical approach to the work of a midwife.
Oh, interesting.
And he even uses the term meutics.
Which comes from the Greek word for midwifery.
Yeah.
To describe his method.
So he's saying that he's essentially helping people give birth to knowledge that's already within them.
That's right. He believed his role wasn't to teach, but to facilitate self-discovery through these carefully crafted questions.
Okay.
Just like a midwife doesn't create the baby. Socrates believed he didn't create knowledge. He simply helped bring it into the world.
Okay, it's a compelling analogy, I think.
Yeah.
But how does that really connect with the modern principles of coaching?
Right. Well, one of the core principles of modern coaching is this idea of helping without transfer.
Okay.
Essentially, it means guiding the client towards their own answers and solutions without imposing the coach's own opinions or experiences.
So it's very similar to this idea of the midwife. They're not there to create the solution, but to just help the client uncover it.
Precisely.
Okay.
Now, on the surface, Socrates' method seems to fit quite neatly with this without transfer approach.
Right.
But that's where Dr. Ravier's critique comes in.
Right. He argues that there's this fundamental contradiction between what Socrates claimed to do and how he actually interacted with his students.
So Socrates wasn't always practicing what he preached when it came to helping without transfer.
That's exactly right.
Okay, so what did he do that was so contradictory?
Well, Dr. Ravier highlights several key examples.
Okay.
For instance, he points out that Socrates would often directly refute his students' ideas, labeling them as incorrect or false. So rather than fostering a space for open exploration, he'd impose his own judgments and conclusions on his students.
So it's more like you're wrong and here's why.
Right. And it goes even deeper than that.
Okay.
Socrates also frequently offered his own opinions and arguments, sometimes even launching into these lengthy monologues. And, you know, remember, he was supposed to be guiding his students towards their own truths, not giving them lectures or imposing his worldview.
So he's not just correcting their ideas, but actively replacing them with his own. I can see why Dr. Ravier calls this a contradiction.
And there's more.
Okay.
Socrates was also known to steer conversations towards his desired outcome, using carefully constructed leading questions.
Okay.
So it wasn't a truly open exploration. He was essentially manipulating the dialogue to reach a predetermined conclusion.
Yeah, that's a far cry from a midwife.
Precisely.
Helping a baby emerge naturally.
And it gets even more blatant.
Okay.
Dr. Ravier points out that Socrates even gave explicit instructions and corrections to his students.
Oh, wow.
We see this very clearly in the famous dialogue with Meno's slave.
Oh, you mean the one where he's supposedly demonstrating that knowledge is innate?
That's the one.
The one where he guides the slave to a geometrical proof through questioning.
That's right. But when you examine it closely, it becomes clear that Socrates is directing the slave, not simply guiding him.
Okay.
He feeds the slave the answers through this carefully orchestrated series of questions, leading him to a predetermined outcome rather than fostering genuine self-discovery.
So even that classic example of Socratic questioning isn't as without transfer as it seems.
Exactly.
So Dr. Ravier is really building a pretty strong case here that Socrates, despite his claims of being like a midwife, was often a very directive teacher.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And this leads to the heart of Dr. Ravier's argument.
Okay.
He posits that Socrates' true objective was to examine and judge the false wisdom of those he engaged with.
Okay.
And lead them towards his own understanding of truth and good.
So we'll place their false wisdom with his version of true wisdom.
You hit the nail on the head.
Yeah, that definitely clashes with the without transfer approach we see in modern coaching.
And this distinction is absolutely vital when we're comparing Socrates' methods to the principles of modern coaching, which emphasizes facilitating the client's own process of self-discovery without imposing the coach's beliefs or solutions.
Yeah.
Right. So,
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, it's interesting because on the one hand, you have Socrates as this ideal model for questioning and self-discovery.
Right.
But then on the other hand, Dr. Revere is presenting him as somebody who was really not afraid to kind of steer the conversation and impose his views.
Right.
It makes you think twice about how we interpret all those classic dialogues.
And that's what makes Dr. Revere's analysis so compelling.
Yeah.
He's not diminishing Socrates' contribution to philosophy or education.
Right.
He's simply pointing out this inherent tension between Socrates' methods and the modern principles of without transfer coaching.
So he's not saying he's right or wrong. He's just saying that maybe his approach doesn't align perfectly with the way we think about coaching today.
Exactly. And this distinction is crucial for anyone involved in coaching.
Okay.
Because it forces us to confront the subtle ways that our own biases and assumptions can influence our interactions.
Okay.
Even when we believe we're being completely non-directive.
Yeah, you might think you're facilitating a client's self-discovery, but if you're not careful, you can very easily slip into directing them towards your own preferred outcomes.
Precisely.
Much like Socrates did.
And that brings up a question that I find particularly thought-provoking.
Okay.
Could Socrates' method, with its emphasis on questioning, be adapted to fit within a without transfer framework?
Oh, that's interesting.
Is it possible to utilize the power of inquiry without inadvertently imposing our own conclusions?
That's a great question. And it seems like a real challenge.
Right.
But I think it's a really valuable one to explore because if we can harness the essence of Socratic dialogue while remaining true to those without transfer principles, it could be really powerful.
I agree it would require a very deliberate and mindful approach to questioning, focusing on open-ended inquiries that encourage deep reflection, without leading the client down a predetermined path. Perhaps by shifting the focus from uncovering a singular truth to exploring multiple perspectives and possibilities, we could create a space where genuine self-discovery can flourish.
It's like we need to take the spirit of the Socratic dialogue and kind of filter it through this without transfer lens and refine those techniques to make sure that they're really empowering the client's autonomy, self-determination.
It's about harnessing the power of curiosity and inquiry, but with a constant awareness of the potential pitfalls of directing the client towards our own perceived solutions.
It seems like Dr. Revere's prompting us to really examine the roots of coaching.
Absolutely.
And not just assume that these historical figures fit neatly into our modern frameworks. It's a reminder that even the pioneers in the field can have limitations.
Right.
And it's up to us to learn from both their successes and shortcomings.
Absolutely. And that's what makes the outsider edge so engaging.
Yes.
It encourages us to question our assumptions, to critically evaluate even the most revered figures, and to constantly push the boundaries of how we approach coaching and personal development.
This has really made me think about what it means to be a without transfer coach.
Right.
It's not just about using certain tools.
Right.
You really have to look at your own motives and make sure you're putting the client first.
I couldn't agree more. It's a really subtle but profound shift.
Yeah.
You have to recognize that while our knowledge and experience can be valuable, our main goal as coaches is to create a space where clients can find their own answers.
So letting go of that need to be the expert.
Exactly.
Okay.
And I think Dr. Revere's look at Socrates is a good reminder that even the smartest people can struggle with this.
Yeah.
It's a process of always checking yourself and making sure you're really honoring that without transfer idea.
Yeah. It's definitely a journey, not a destination.
Right.
You have to be humble and curious and willing to question everything.
Well said. So as we continue to look at Dr. Revere's work, I want you to keep this tension in mind.
Okay.
It's a really interesting area, and I think it can help us understand what it means to be a without transfer coach.
Yeah. I'm really excited to see where this all goes.
Me too. I think we're just getting started.
Yeah.
And, maybe by questioning what we think we know about Socrates, we can find even better ways to help our clients grow.
Yeah. I can't wait till next time.
Me neither.
So keep asking questions. And remember, the real outsider edge is the one you make for yourself.